All right, well, welcome everyone. We are really excited to see you all again. This is so fun to kind of have our little monthly gathering here of our virtual tasting. So I see some new faces, which is really exciting. So thanks for joining us if you haven't joined one of our tastings before. My name is Sarah Rathbun. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at Dry Creek Vineyard, and we're doing something a little different today. We are getting really excited about Thanksgiving next week, and Thanksgiving is going to be a little different this year for all of us. So we thought we'd, make it fun and talk about the best part of the meal, which is really the wine when it comes down to it, right? It's my favorite side dish. So I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping here. We are going to have everybody on mute just to kind of contain the background noise so everybody can hear. Please feel free to use the chat function down below at the bottom of your screen where it says chat. Send us questions. I will be making sure that Darren and Tim see them. And then at some point we can open it up if you can make a comment, unmute yourself type thing. But this way it'll keep us a little bit more contained. So without further ado, I want to introduce our winemaker, Tim Bell, and then also our concierge wine educator, Darren Abel. If you haven't had a chance to come to the winery and meet Darren, this is a really fun opportunity to have him involved. So I'm gonna let Tim take it away.
You guys hear it? I can't hear this at all.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Great to see you. There's a lot of familiar faces out there. Hopefully some new friends will make there too. I see one of us is we're being joined by the Aurora Borealis. That's great. I don't see any human beings, but the Aurora Borealis is there. That's cool. So welcome everyone to this virtual tasting. It's for those of you who've empty glass. Sorry. Those of you who have joined me in these before, it's been a while, a few months since I've got to do one of these. And a little thing called Harvest intervened, but it's really great to be back. I was really looking forward to this because I have a lot of fun in these, and I get to have Darren, my coworker and compatriot, helping us out there as well. So if you want to say a quick hi, Darren.
Hello, everyone. I think I'm unmuted, and I'm really happy to see a lot of familiar faces and some of the new faces. If I haven't met you, welcome. I'm happy to jump on in these weird times. Very cool. I can't believe it's Thanksgiving next week. It's bizarre, but I've done a lot of tasting recently. I haven't made a turkey recently, but I've thought a lot about Thanksgiving next week and the different ingredients and everything, and I know that whatever you choose to pair on Thanksgiving Day is going to be fantastic. But I'm going to let Tim lead the way, and then I'm going to pop in and out and talk a little bit about the wines and how I think they're going to work really well with what we're doing.
All right, great. Well, I look forward to hearing what you have to say about food pairings with the wines, Darren. And I just wanted to, before we jump into the wines, to give a two second or maybe 1 minute sort of capsule summary of where we are in the year here at the winery. So, outside in the vineyards, we've had a few sort of very cold, frosty evenings. And so the vines are rapidly dropping their leaves. The leaves are getting crispy and they're dropping leaves, and it's clearly heading towards dormancy. And pretty soon, any day now, the vineyard crews will be going through and starting to prune the vines and cut them back to, a few buds for growth next year when that starts in the spring. Here in the winery, we are quite busy. We, have, definitely ended harvest, but we are in preparation mode for starting our bottling season, and we've been working on our 2020 Sauvignon Blanc blend in recent days, and are really excited about that wine. So getting that put together, and we'll be bottling it in a little while. It has a little ways to go, but we can't wait. We got to start thinking about it now. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at in the wine season. And, you know, it'll just be off to the races basically over the next several months up until harvest of this ongoing cycle of making blends and getting them up into tank and ready to bottle, and then put it in the bottle and it'll be ready for you at the right time when they're released. We've got a diverse and exciting lineup here of 3 wines. Our 2019 Chenin Blanc, and then a couple of 2018 vintage reds, our heritage vines Zinfandel, and our Malbec. And so without further ado, I'll jump into talking about the first wine, and as Sarah mentioned, welcome your questions, anything you want to know about the winemaking. Or my personal life, you know, whatever. No, I'm kidding about that. So 2019 Chenin Blanc, I've got a glass right here.
Okay.
You know, usually when I'm tasting wine, I have a little spit cup, you know, I'm spitting out, but there's no spit cup here, so I'm gonna just have to drink it. It's one of those hazards of the occupation, and one I suffer gladly. So if you have this in your glass, if you're fortunate to have that there with you, give it a swirl and a sniff and a taste. I really love this one because you know, we do a lot of Sauvignon Blanc, and it is an aromatic white like Sauvignon Blanc, but it's so distinctly different. You know, just smelling this, I get some really nice floral notes. Probably, you know, maybe honeysuckle. I'm not sure exactly what the floral notes would be. There's also, I find this kind of typical of Chenin Blanc is maybe a little bit of sort of a watermelon, even sort of watermelon rind quality a little bit, and it sort of edges into just a faint touch of fresh cucumber, which is really nice. And I also get a little bit of earthiness. There's kind of like this, like if you were outside, maybe it was a little warm, but you had a summer shower and it's on some gravel and a little bit of dirt there too, and you get some of those aromas wafting up, and it just kind of reminds me of the great earth in the Clarksburg Delta region where these grapes are grown. And you know, in tasting the wine, there's a nice crisp acidity and just beautiful freshness to the fruit. There's a little bit of extra ripeness to the fruit aromas in this wine from the 2019 vintage compared to other vintages, but yet it also is just very distinctly Chenin Blanc and that particular vineyard, the Wilson Ranch, that we source these grapes from. So 2019 was a cooler vintage, and we usually pick this wine at the lowest sugar of any of our wines. So in 2019, it was only 21.3 Brix. So the Brix scale, you may or may not know, is roughly a percentage of sugar by weight in the juice. And so that's fairly low for most wines we make. Like Sauvignon Blanc that we make, Fumé Blanc might be 22 to 23.5 Brix. Reds are usually maybe at the low end 23.7, 23.8, up to 25 Brix or a little more. So this is really at the low end of that scale. But we really like it for this style of wine. The flavors really develop at that low sugar. And I really remember in 2019, we actually were kind of waiting around. It was a later harvest for the Chenin than normal. Typically we're in August when we harvest the Chenin Blanc, but in 2019 it was, I think it was like September 5th, somewhere around there. And so I really think that extra time on the vine gave it a little bit of extra ripeness, and it's just kind of amazing that the sugar was still so low. You know, we've had it as high as 22 Brix or a little, just a shade over in the hotter years. And we really were kind of, I felt like the flavor was there pretty good early on, but we were really waiting to just get enough sugar to really make a stable wine that wasn't so tart that it would set your teeth chattering. So a little extra time gave us some nice balance of acidity and some nice ripe fruit flavors in this wine. I mentioned this vineyard and this wine is made from grapes grown in the Clarksburg Delta region. So, you know, most of our wines are Dry Creek Valley, or we have a few Russian River Valley wines. But for many years, we've been sourcing fruit from the Wilson family in the Clarksburg area, which is just south of Sacramento. And this is a photograph of that vineyard. It's so it's this broad sort of delta plain, and it's a lot of very nice, rich soil that's been deposited by alluvial action from the rivers. Probably periodic flooding and receding of the rivers, and actually just from the perspective of the photographer in this photo you have right here, right behind that is like a canal or a major shipping channel. Basically, there's big levees, so this big, kind of body of water right there that helps moderate the influence, the temperature. And there's all these different waterways, including the Sacramento River proper, winding their way through this region. The vines are big, and the clusters are big. It's one of the biggest clustered varieties, and one of the factors besides the flavor profile we like in this wine, one of the factors for harvesting this at a lower sugar is that these clusters of Chenin Blanc, if you leave them out there a long time in the vineyard and really want to try to push the ripeness, the grape berries kept getting bigger and bigger, and they start sort of squishing each other and juicing within the cluster, and you start getting mold. So it's really fortunate for a practical reason that we like those flavors at a low Brix, when we can do that when the grapes and the bunches are really sound. So with the winemaking on this is pretty simple and straightforward. The only tweak I made since I came here in 2011 was changing the yeast strain we use for getting a little bit of better aromatics out of the fruit and a little bit cleaner quality. And but basically we just ferment this at low temperatures in stainless steel tanks. The fermentation takes anywhere from probably 20 to 25 days, so it's a long, slow fermentation. And if you look at the label, you'll see that there's a tiny bit of residual sugar. It says 0.4% on the label. And the way we achieve that is pretty interesting. So you could arrest the fermentation. So if you get to the level of sugar you want, you can chill the wine, maybe add a little bit of the SO2 that would help arrest the fermentation. But we've chosen a different method, and well, I could say the other method you could use would be to just ferment it dry and then buy a little grape concentrate and add it back. It's legal, but we choose not to do that. I like a different method that is used in Germany, probably Austria, some other places in Europe as well, where you preserve some of the juice and don't ferment it. In German, they call it Süßreserve, and I'm probably saying that wrong because I don't speak German. But in any case, we take some of the juice every year and we put it through a sort of a coarse filter that takes out some of any of the natural yeast that might be hanging out there, makes the wine a little clearer, or the juice a little clearer, I should say. And then we chill it, just get it as cold as we can get. And sometimes we actually get a little block of ice forming in that tank of juice because it's so cold. We don't want it to ferment. And then what we do at the end is take a little bit of that juice and add it back in to the wine and get just the right balance of sugar and acid. And you really, when you taste this wine, it doesn't taste sweet. It tastes dry, and that's why we put on the label dry Chenin Blanc. But that little bit of residual sugar is in keeping with a lot of the white wines from the Loire Valley, which is where Chenin Blanc has become, first really popular and well known. It's its native homeland, I guess you would say. And that little bit of residual sugar also adds a little texture, a little bit of richness and roundness in the wine that we wouldn't have otherwise. So it's just not too lean. So we have these kind of nice, slightly underripe flavors, but a nice round texture with the wine as well.
So
we don't use.
I just want to bust in because we've gotten a couple of people asking us, and I want to get the question before we get too off topic of why don't we plant Chenin Blanc in the Dry Creek Valley or Sonoma or Napa? What is it about Clarksburg that's better for the grapes?
Well, that's a really good question. Why Clarksburg? And I would sort of say that like the Loire Valley, where Chenin Blanc has become well known as a quality grape, the Clarksburg is a river region. So in the Loire Valley, there's the Loire River that winds through that region, and so you have sort of this similar, perhaps, climate influence. As far as planting it or not planting in Dry Creek Valley, we did have it planted here in years past, and you know, I've always been told by Kim and her father Dave, who founded the winery, that they didn't like how the grape performed here. I still think that, you know, because we do Sauvignon Blanc and other aromatic white so well, that we might be able to do it well here in the right vineyard site. But I don't think we had the right vineyard site ourselves, perhaps. So Clarksburg has just turned out to be kind of ground zero for Chenin Blanc in California. It's the best known region for that grape, and it produces really beautiful fruit. Good question.
Perfect. And then we also kind of got a question of why do we make Chenin Blanc? And I don't know if we really touched on that, of kind of our history with Chenin Blanc.
Yeah, well, it really is born out of our founder, David Stair's love for the wines of the Loire Valley. You know, he started this winery back in 1972 after having traveled in Europe and tasted different wines throughout Europe. And the white wines of the Loire Valley were particularly favorites of his. So, and I think he really liked Bordeaux as well. So there's a reason we do that. But the white grapes of the Loire Valley are Chenin Blanc and Sauvignon Blanc. And so those are two very important white wines for us. And, you know, you probably may know we were pioneers in planting Sauvignon Blanc in Dry Creek Valley. And Chenin Blanc is one of those varieties that kind of was very popular for a while in California, fell out of popularity, and then sort of has made a little bit of a resurgence. But we have never stopped making it because we love it. That's just the bottom line, is we really like this wine, and I do too. It's a very versatile wine and really quite affordable as well.
Perfect. Well, I'd love to hear Darren's thoughts on kind of how this works with food. And Tim, definitely want to hear your opinion too of what are your favorite foods to go with Chenin, especially around the Thanksgiving table.
Well, first off, thank you. Tim, I think it's so cool that piece about adding a little bit of that unfermented Chenin Blanc. That's kind of my go-to trick when we talk about our Chenin Blanc and how we balance out the acidity, because Chenin Blanc is such a high acid wine. So when you can balance it out by adding that unfermented sweet juice, it's a cool trick that I don't think anyone really does. Maybe they do, like you said, in Germany, but I haven't heard anyone doing that domestically. But just to touch on Chenin Blanc as a grape and a varietal, it's one of the most versatile grapes. In the Loire Valley and domestically, it makes very dry wines like the one that you're tasting right now. It can make off-dry wines, semi-sweet wines, but it could also make sparkling wines, which are fantastic, and dessert wines. There's a region in the Loire that focuses on dessert wines as well. But in terms of a wine paired with food, white wine, I don't think you could get a better wine. One, this wine is unoaked, so it's all stainless steel fermented. So oak, when you're pairing with food, can be difficult. You can do it, but it has to be the right. It has to be the right dish. When you have unoaked white wine, especially Chenin Blanc at such high acid, it's super versatile. So let's just talk about Thanksgiving and talk about kind of the day leading up to Thanksgiving and the day of. You have Thanksgiving can be kind of tiresome, and there's a lot of cooking involved. And in that case, there's probably a lot of consumption involved. This is a wine consumption, that is, and food, but this is a wine that breakfast, lunch, and dinner is fantastic. So when you're preparing your meals, Chenin Blanc works really well. When you have an appetizer such as oysters, Chenin Blanc is a fantastic pairing. Cheese is an incredible pairing. A lot of people know Sauvignon Blanc with goat cheese, but Chenin Blanc is equally as delicious. And then when it comes to the actual table, if someone doesn't want to drink, let's say Pinot or Zin, which are really common, and we'll talk about that, are really common pairings with Thanksgiving, Chenin Blanc is perfect. One, because turkey is fairly neutral, but when we're talking about Thanksgiving, we want not just talk about turkey. We want to talk about everything. And you're not going to have 30 wines for 30 different flavors when we're talking about Thanksgiving. So you want a couple different wines that are going to be palatable for everyone. And Chenin is one of those wines. Again, can't talk enough about the acidity. It's a high acid wine, and there are a lot of flavors within Thanksgiving that accentuate that wine. So cranberry sauce, turkey and cranberry sauce and Chenin Blanc, I don't think could be a better pairing. If you're just doing turkey and let's say gravy, the Chenin Blanc is gonna, it's got such high acid and fat. There's a lot of fat in that gravy. It's gonna get kind of cut through. But I think if you have that kind of that trilogy, the turkey, cranberry, and gravy, you're not going to be disappointed with the Chenin. So overall, I love it. I think it's just, it's so versatile. It's perfect. It's one of the main reasons that this is a signature wine for us. So, Tim, do you agree with my pairing? It's okay if you don't.
I have a completely different view. No, actually, the first two things you mentioned are the first things I thought of is if you were going to have some oysters as an appetizer, or maybe some other, sort of perhaps seafood-based appetizer. Like I could see, maybe a little shrimp cocktail even too, being something to go with the Chenin Blanc, and certainly cheeses. Or if you just want to have a glass of wine before the meal by itself, this is a really nice wine to open with. And something we often do at our house when we're entertaining people, if they walk in the door, that the Chenin might be one of the first things they get in their glass. As far as with the food, I think, yeah, it's whatever how you're like Darren talked about with the turkey, whatever you're going to do with it. If you're going to, personally, I don't think I would want the Chenin necessarily with turkey with gravy. I'd probably want a red wine with that. But if you were going to, do the turkey by itself, or maybe even try it with the cranberry sauce, I'd actually really like to try that pairing. That sounds interesting. Then the Chenin could work too. If you were really going like over the top and wanted to have multiple wines with the meal, you could have the Chenin and the Heritage Zin, a couple other wines maybe, and depending what you're eating at that moment, maybe the vegetables like I don't know about you guys, but a lot of times at Thanksgiving, one of the staples was that dish with green beans and the cream of mushroom soup and French fried onions on top, right? Maybe the Chenin would go good with that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think really a lot of people get bogged down with specifics because it can be overwhelming if you try to research like what goes well with what. Bottom line is drink what you want and eat what you want. You're not going to offend the dish. You're not going to offend the wine. If you like Chenin with steak, have at it. If you want a good pairing, usually the wine will accentuate either one or the other, right? It's going to make the wine better, or it's going to make the food better. If you have a great pairing, and we all have had these before because we've all done this, we've done the dinners before, etc. They will accentuate both, but I think don't get bogged down by trying to find the perfect wine. And because Thanksgiving has a wide variety of flavors, I think our wines are going to do really well because our wines are not overwhelming in any capacity. They're not super light and they're not super heavy. They're always very balanced, and they always have a nice snap of acidity and fruit and tannin, which are going to go really well with basically most food.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there. And, actually David wrote in the comments that the Chenin's always a crowd pleaser for us. For me, it's my go-to wine that I, before could bring over to people's houses, because a lot of times people aren't familiar with Chenin, but nearly everyone likes it. So it's always a great one to bring over. And then Mark was commenting on the versatility and how he likes it with Indian food, which I couldn't agree more with. That's delicious.
Yeah, and I think the hint of residual sugar in this wine, like it's not sweet. It's certainly not a Riesling or a Gewürztraminer, which is kind of like a classic with really spicy Indian food. It still will work really well. The one thing about about really spicy food, very difficult to pair wine with unless it's sweet. So dry wines, wines with any kind of bitterness or astringency is not going to work well with spicy. So now spice, because we'll get into different spices, baking spices. We'll talk about kind of the sweet potatoes and stuffing with sage and things like that. Things that have herbs, that's like the perfect combination with what we're doing. But again, like real heat, you want to have a cold beer or water.
Perfect. Well, let's get moving on to the Heritage Zin then. So I can see the white wine is slowly dissipating from people's glasses. So
I'll just, before we go to the Heritage Zin, I'll just throw in as a confirmation for what Art said about Chenin Blanc and Indian food is, I was just talking to Gary, who is in charge of a lot of our wine shipments here, and he just said he's sending some Chenin Blanc to India. So there you go. It's an international favorite. So Heritage Zin is the next wine. This is the 2018 vintage. And if you're lucky enough to have that there, let's give that a smell and a taste. So to me, you get some really nice sort of boysenberry, maybe even ripe cranberry kind of flavors. Makes me think of something on the Thanksgiving table right there. A little chocolate. There's some nice baking spices, a little hint of oak in there. Really nice kind of smooth texture. You know, there's you know, just a touch of tan in there still, but it's very kind of smooth and developed. It's drinking really nicely now. And you know, a lot of those same flavors come through on the palate that I just mentioned, and as far as the aromas as well. So this wine, we always like to talk about sort of the origin story of why do we call this Heritage Vines Zinfandel. And it's an interesting story that, you know, goes back quite a number of years. So, you know, in the years past, you might say somewhere around in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of selections of Zinfandel available commercially from the nurseries for planting your vineyard. There was very few selections, and you know, our owners, Kim and Don, were not very happy with what was out there and available. And so we wanted to develop some Zinfandel vineyards and find a unique selection of Zinfandel that would produce higher quality than might be available from if we just went to the grapevine nursery and picked up some cuttings. So what we ended up doing was sourcing some cuttings from an old vine vineyard called Mazzoni, and it was near Geyserville, which is a little bit northeast of us. And this vineyard actually later was sold to someone else and removed and planted to a different variety. So we're fortunate that we have those, and there's very few people that have these cuttings. And it began a long, laborious process of growing up these cuttings and selecting the best vines, and then, you know, taking those buds and propagating them and creating more vines until we had enough buds to plant a vineyard. And so it's this unique selection of Zinfandel that we've ended up planting in 3 of our estate vineyards. And we also have a longtime grower friend of ours, George Summers, who many of you may be familiar with from the Summers Ranch Zinfandel. That also is the Mazzoni selection as well. So these 4 vineyards kind of are the core blend of this Heritage Vine Zin. And it was a way to preserve that genetic heritage of these great old vine vineyards and get some of that really high quality in a younger vineyard. And our first vineyard was planted in 1994, and then over the years, a few more were added. So when you take all those buds that I was talking about propagating them, then you basically plant rootstock and then at the right time of growth of the rootstock, you take one or two little buds. I think it's usually basically 2 buds, and you graft it onto the vine in a very specific way. And this drawing here kind of gives you some really great diagrams to show you how you put those buds on the vine. And actually, if you do this method of tea budding today, you will bring in typically a specific professional crew to do this budding work, because just not anyone can do it. It's really kind of an art, and you get these really nicely trained people, and they'll go along with a little pouch of different buds, and they've got a knife, and they'll cut the shapes just right to fit in where they cut the rootstock, and they wrap it up in tape, and when it's time for the vines to push, you'll start to get a couple of shoots, and eventually you train that out, and eventually end up with a whole vine. And so it's a very laborious and painstaking process, but I think it's borne great results. I was going to say borne great fruit, but that would be getting too corny here, right? But it's given us really great results with this wine. We also do blend in some Petit Syrah, of course, to add some richness, some color, some depth to this wine. And yeah, really, really nice. Some nice baking spices in that, along with the fruit. When we make this wine, we bring it into the winery, we crush it into the tank, and as we're crushing, we're typically throwing in a bunch of dry ice. And this is a technique that I really liked, that I learned from Pinot Noir winemakers, and it's aimed at trying to get better color extraction out of the grapes. So, the color is all in the skins, and Zin is a lighter colored grape variety. And so to get a little bit bigger, richer wine, we as you see in this photograph, you can kind of see this smoke coming up from that bin of grapes, and that's the dry ice working in the bin. And we think that sort of maybe freezes the cell wall and sort of helps burst it open to get some of that pigment out. And does it in a really nice way, where it's not pulverizing the skins, but it's generally giving us better extraction. And we'll let those grapes soak at a cool temperature, maybe 50, 52 degrees for a few days, like 3 days maybe. And then we'll add the yeast, and then the fermentation takes over. So we do perhaps get a little bit of native yeast activity at that low temperature, get some nice color extraction early on, and then it's off to the races with the fermentation to get some heat up and get some of the nice, finish off getting that color and tannin extraction out of the skins. And then, this wine has one of the lower new oak percentages of any of our reds. So this particular vintage was actually only about 22% new oak. I really think that with Zinfandel, it's really important to not overdo the oak. You can really overwhelm the fruit and beautiful spice characters that we get in Dry Creek Valley. It's particularly a characteristic of Dry Creek Valley, I believe, that, from my experience in working in other areas, we get this beautiful fruit and spice character in the Zinfandel. And so just a little bit of oak, and we use some American, some French, some European oak as well. And one thing we talk about sometimes is a barrel we developed specifically for Zinfandel. This was something I worked with a cooper on, and used some really nifty software to dial in the right combination of wood and toasting. And we've ended up with a barrel that is 75% European oak staves, 25% American oak staves, and the heads, or the ends of the barrel, which is kind of what you see there with all the writing on it, that's French oak. So we have 3 different oak sources blended into this barrel, and in a toast that is fairly not that long of a toast, but kind of ramps up in temperature and then plateaus for a while. And it's really a barrel that could only have been made with the great technology we have available to us today to know about the grain, measurement of grain, and the tannins in the wood, in the oak wood, and be able to monitor very carefully and control very carefully the temperature at toasting. And then the end result has been a barrel that really respects the fruit and the wine. It adds some nice spice and toast elements, but it definitely kind of is an accent underneath the fruit, and it doesn't lay on top of it.
Hey, Tim, Marie was actually asking, how long do you leave Zinfandel in an oak barrel?
Yeah, so Zinfandels can be on a little bit shorter aging profile than wines like Cabernet or even Merlot. And so, you might be able to get away with as little as 12 months in a barrel, but we're usually somewhere around 14 up to 16 months in the barrel. And so it does go to bottle a little earlier than some of the Bordeaux reds like Cab and Merlot. But yeah, that seems to be a really nice balance for us at that length of time. So Darren, let's talk food.
Yeah. Again, when we talk about our wines, and food, we're talking about balance. And Tim's wines, our philosophy, and Tim mentioned, is never too much oak, never too much long, extended pressing maceration where we're getting more tannins. Our wines are very balanced, both in the vineyard and then both winemaking. We don't pick too early. We don't pick too late. If you pick too late, what's going to happen is the grapes get really raisiny and overripe, and the sugar levels go through the roof. And then you have a Zinfandel that's 15 to 16% in alcohol, and very hard to pair food with such a high alcohol wine that doesn't have, or at least lacks acidity. Acidity is our friend when we're pairing. So let's talk about food. Again, appetizers. And I know Linda Finkus, I'm throwing a shout out to Linda because I know we chatted. Linda, if you want to say hello at some point, either privately. We spoke at length about pairings and things like that. Salumi, Journeyman Salumi is a brand that we've been partnering with recently, but any kind of salami that has some sort of herb or spice and a good bit of fat content is going to go perfectly with our Zinfandel. So when you're noshing on cheese and salami while the turkey is in the oven and you're watching the game, this is a perfect wine. No doubt. Salami and Zinfandel are synonymous for sure. When it comes to the actual table, I think besides Pinot, we don't have a Pinot today, but the theme is higher acidity wines, lacking heavy oak. We want wines that are nicely spiced and have good fruit content, but also not heavily tannic, because high tannic wines are going to overwhelm what we're doing at Thanksgiving, unless you're doing something unconventional like red meat, which most people aren't. But the combination of the dishes, whether it's like the sausage and the sage stuffing and the sweet potatoes and the herbs and the greens, I think are going to work really well with this wine. Especially this one in particular, because it is a blend of Russian River as well as Dry Creek. So we have a vineyard called the Farmhouse. Some of you have had that before. It's one of our newer single vineyard wines that we released in the last couple of years. And it's really rich. It's got a lot of flavor, delicious. But so this, as I mentioned, the heritage is a blend of Russian River and Dry Creek. So you have the cooler, foggier, climatic influences of the Russian River, which tend to be a little higher in acid. And then you combine that with, the warmer, riper conditions of Dry Creek, and you get a really balanced wine, not dissimilar to some of our, to the Fumé Blanc that we make as well. So I think that you have the two AVAs that work for a really balanced wine. This is not an overly jammy wine. The alcohol is in place. It's below 15%. And again, that Petit Syrah is going to add a lot of color and a lot of spice, which normally Zinfandel does not have on its own. There's actually a little bit of Carignan. Maybe Tim can talk about that. And it's 14.5% in alcohol. So yeah, I think Zin, Pinot, I had a Beaujolais the other day. If you're kind of branching out, fantastic wine for Thanksgiving if you want to do something a little bit different. Oftentimes, Zinfandel is kind of pigeonholed with barbecue, but works really well around the holidays.
Well, I would just say when we were talking earlier today, Darren and I, about pairing wines with Thanksgiving foods, and we started talking about stuffing. I know one of the popular stuffing recipes that we like at our house is one that has the sausage and sage and some water chestnuts in it. And my mouth just started watering when I thought about drinking that with the Zinfandel. I think it would be great. And even the Malbec that we're gonna taste might be an interesting pairing with that as well. But yeah, definitely a nice match for for that stuffing, which is something I almost like better than turkey, quite honestly.
I agree. I mean, leftovers are where it's at. It's always
Well,
good. Go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to mention you mentioned the Carignan, and one thing I meant to say but forgot was not only are those heritage vines vineyards from that Mazzoni selection of Zinfandel an important part of this blend, but quite honestly, we typically have some wines that we don't use in the old vine Zin because we only want to make so much of that wine. As we have these leftover wonderful old vine Zinfandels, and they get put into the heritage Zin. So it's this really high quality juice that goes into a more affordable wine. And the 2018, I know we had some of Zinfandel from the Bucagnani vineyard, a longtime great grape growing family here in the valley. There was Forchini's as well, some of their old vines in. And then that Carignan is really from a small block of old vine Carignan planted in 1904 that I originally sourced to use as a blender for our old vine Zin. But we had a little bit left over, and often do every year, that we could slip into the heritage vine Zin. And so again, it's a really great tool in our spice box
Yeah.
of flavors to add new accents.
And actually, speaking of spices, if you're cooking out there and you want to do something, not as traditional, like I love Southwest flavors. I love cumin. I love cardamom, things like that. Don't be afraid to, change up the bird or change up your stuffing, because those flavors are classic with our wines for sure. I cook with them often, and I always have dried Creek Zin at home, plenty of it, and trust me, it works.
Perfect. Well, I know we got to get moving to the next wine, but we have a bunch of questions, so I want to make sure that we get them going in here. And so they're primarily about kind of making wine, aging wine, and the growing of it. So I can start right off. Rick was asking, do the different styles of trellising make a difference in the quality of the Zin? Yeah,
that could be a question that would really spark some lively debate among winemakers. I would say short answer is I've gotten really, and we do get really high quality Zinfandel from different styles of trellising, and really with Zin, the kind of the big divide is whether you do what we call head trained vines. So it's basically where the vine there's no wires and no trellis really. Just the vines are formed in sort of a little bush, basically, like if you were in the southern hemisphere, they'd call those bush vines. And that's the old school traditional way of planting Zinfandel and what you see in a lot of the old vine vineyards. But the newer trellising using a basically kind of a vertical trellis, which you will, if you came to the winery, you would see it here at our Wallace Ranch vineyard right in front of the winery, which is one of the vineyards in this line. That makes really high quality Zinfandel as well. I really like the look of the head trained vines and the connection with tradition, which again, if you came to the winery, you'd see a head trained vineyard right next to that Wallace Ranch vineyard. It's a very old school and labor intensive way of making wine. It does, the vines do form this really nice sort of umbrella, which allows just the right amount of light and shade to protect the clusters, but also ripen them. So, in the end, you might get a little bit different qualities in some of the fruit because of how the light penetrates into the canopy, but it's all good fruit. It really, either way it goes, does well.
Perfect. Well, and so then, we've talked a lot about tannins and acidity of this Zinfandel. So Mark was asking, what measurements are you using to tell when the grapes are ready to harvest as far as those phenolics go?
Right here. No, you can use different good technologies to measure color and tannins, all of the polyphenols in wines. We are not a super high tech laboratory. We're not a really tiny winery, but we're kind of operate more like a tiny winery in that we have fairly basic chemistry that we do here, and we really kind of rely on our taste and nose. But having said that, it's you never want to stop exploring new tools, and it's funny that you asked that question, because just today I got an email from my alma mater, UC Davis, and they're offering an extension course in measuring color and tannin in March, and I think I might go take that and learn a little bit more about how we might be able to use that to make our wines.
Perfect. Well, and then last Zinfandel question before we move to the Malbec. David Wallace was noticing, you were saying that, he's noticed that opening Zinfandels that are 10 years or more can be wonderful. What's your kind of general rule for aging Zinfandel?
Yeah, it's something where it all depends on your individual taste in part. And you have to sort of kind of experiment and trial that, or go to a winery that's maybe doing a library tasting to explore that yourself. But in general, I do tend to like Zinfandels, well, I think they're very drinkable young. It's just a wine that's very approachable young, and they have this, exuberant, sometimes just jumps out of the glass kind of fruit and spice. But I would say, anywhere from 5 to 10 years for me is a really nice window for age, if you've got good aging conditions, the right temperature and all that sort of thing. For me, I generally probably wouldn't want to go over 10 or 12 years myself, but there is, you kind of have to know the wine. If it's got really good acidity and just the right structure, maybe the right tannin structure, and you've tasted it young and kind of have a good feel for that, it could go up to 20 years, I would say, and do really nicely. We've had some Zinfandels that are that old or even older that have shown really well here in our library tastings that we do internally. But it's not always consistent. So me, kind of that 5 to 8, maybe even up to 10-year window, I think is a really good one.
Tim, real quick, talking about that, because I get this question all the time, and I recently started telling people, and maybe correct me, 5 to 10 years from the vintage date. So
Yes.
is what I'm going after. So, this wine is the heritage is a 2018. So I mean, piggyback on that, Zinfandel, that's why I love Zin, is because right out the get-go, you don't have to sit it. I mean, you can drink it. Do I think it's going to get a little bit better after a couple of years? Maybe. It will change. It's going to get more complex after a few years, but I like Zin for that pop, that kind of, that initial fruit and spice, that upfront, those upfront characteristics that I think that you, in terms of Cabernet, when we're talking about Cabernet blends, I think you really want to let it sit for a couple of years. Certainly some of the bigger ones, but Zin is one of those wines that you can enjoy now, but will definitely change, but not necessarily, like you said, it's all about kind of what you want from the wine.
Well, perfect. Well, let's get on to Malbec, and that was kind of the sleeper little surprise wine in our Thanksgiving wine pairing toolkit, because Chenin and Zinfandel are so perfect for Thanksgiving, but we wanted to bring in something new to this. So Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Malbec?
Yeah, absolutely. I see someone holding up the bottle of Malbec there to the camera. Thanks. Glad you have that there. And yeah, this is a Malbec is just a very different red wine and a very different grape as well. So it's part of the Bordeaux family of red grapes, and I always tell people I always think of Malbec as kind of the oddball of the Bordeaux family. It just doesn't look that much like the other grapes especially when you bite into it. It's got a lot of sort of this kind of green pulp, and you wouldn't think it's going to be very high color when you look at the big berries, and there's kind of a lot of pulp in there. But it typically, at least in good vineyards, can be one of the darker colored varieties. But what's unusual too is usually with that dark color comes a lot of tannin, and there's not a lot of tannin. It's typically kind of more velvety, and sometimes it's a good blender in Bordeaux blends for that reason like our Mariner, because it can sort of naturally balance out some of the tannins that might be a little rough in the Cabernet or Petit Verdot. So this Malbec typically has been all sourced from our DCV6 vineyard, which is right across the road from the winery. And it's a selection from Bordeaux that is just beautiful. So really dark color, it's kind of a voluptuous feel to it in the mouth. And if you've got it there, let's taste it. So some really nice barrel spice laying on top of some really nice sort of boysenberry, blackberry fruit there. A little touch of cedar.
Yeah, Tim, just real quick, this is one of the more aromatic wines that we have. Like, for some reason, I don't know, I get a lot of floral, I get some rose petal or violet. Yeah.
And there's some nice, for me, some nice spices. I get like a little bit of maybe white pepper, or even a hint of anise maybe, but.
Definitely the pepper for sure.
And I've always liked our Malbec. It's just, for me, one of the typical descriptors of the DCV6 fruit has been the acai fruit. Like if you've had some of that juice from that berry, and I get sort of that flavor in that. But this 2018 is a little bit different, and I think in a really positive way. And for me, it kind of is less just about primary fruit, but there's more complexity and other flavors going on, and it actually tastes more serious and Bordeaux-like, and I really like that. And I think, one of the reasons might be that we actually used a little bit of fruit also from another vineyard. This was the first vintage we've done this from our old friend Harry Merlot. Those of you who drink our Cabernet may have heard of his name referenced in our Cabernets. And this 2018 vintage was our first vintage of sourcing some Malbec from Harry Merlot's vineyard as well. It was part of sort of our quest of exploring the different areas of terroir in the valley and making our terroir series of Bordeaux blends. But I believe, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a photo maybe from Harry's vineyard?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's near Lake Sonoma at the north end of the valley, high elevation, a lot of hills, just a stunning vineyard. And we used a fair bit of that Malbec in this blend as well. And we really like how it's ended up in the wine. Other than that, this wine is typically a very sort of straightforward wine to make as this varietal bottling. So we don't usually blend other varieties with it. It's just 100% Malbec. I won't say we never would, because there's always a vintage where you might come up with an idea for something else, but typically it's just a Malbec based wine. This has about 35% new oak, and it's primarily French oak, but there's a little bit of European oak barrels in there as well. But I really, for this wine, really like an emphasis on some really fine French oak from some of the coopers we know that just really marry well with Cabernet, Petit Verdot, and Malbec, barrels that really bring out the best in this wine. And so you get some of that toastiness of the oak, but the wine is bigger than the Zinfandel in some respects, and so it can really handle a higher percentage of new oak. And yeah, so it's pretty, other than that, pretty straightforward red winemaking. We're starting with really high quality fruit, and we just have to give it little nudges and touches along the way to keep it on the straight and narrow until it ends up in the glass.
Tim, why isn't there more Malbec grown in the valley? Is it because it gives way to Cabernet because Cabernet is king and Zin is, Zin and Cabernet? I know Malbec is very popular, but is that, I mean, there's not a whole lot of Malbec grown in Dry Creek, correct?
That is very true, and it is more of a niche wine. People, I don't know why. For some reason, people that think of Bordeaux blends often don't think of Malbec necessarily. They always want to think Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc, and then maybe some Petit Verdot. But I would really like to see more Petit Verdot grown in the valley too, because it's so good. And I love Malbec and Petit Verdot as blending tools. And especially if you want a bigger, richer style of wine, they're really great varieties to have as part of it. But in general, I think some people, maybe because they haven't tried really good Malbec, don't see it as a valuable blender or a wine that stands on its own. And it just hasn't caught on with in general with the public. But I can say for us that this wine is increasing in popularity with our wine club. And, every year we're making just a little bit more because people really love it.
So in terms of in pairing, normally I wouldn't jump to a Malbec for Thanksgiving. When you think of Malbec, often the first thing that people think of is Argentina, and in Argentina they're growing at about 3,000 to 5,000 feet in elevation, and the wines are really intense, and they can be leathery and they can be smoky. And of course, in Argentina, it's basically all red meat. So you're pairing really beautiful Malbecs with delicious cuts of red meat. I think this version of Malbec is a little bit softer than your traditional, if you were going to go, the South American, Argentinian Malbec. But that being said, I think it's versatile enough. I think it's soft enough to pair well with Thanksgiving. As Tim said, there's a lot of spice to this wine. There's some pepper, and I think would go really well with what we're doing in terms of stuffing and gravy. I would love to try it. I haven't tried it. It's definitely going to be on my table. I'm going to do it. I know Lee's going to do it. Lee, I want you to chime in. You've been very shy today.
Sarah's running the mute button.
I'm going to put him on the spot. Hey guys.
How are you? It's great to see you again.
We're doing well. We're hanging in there.
Good to see both of you.
And you too, Tim.
It's good to see everyone.
Hey, Darren, I think we have the most important question of all that we actually haven't addressed yet, which is, what would you pair with pumpkin pie?
Soleil.
And he's 100% right. Unfortunately, we're left to the powers of Mother Nature, and we haven't had a Soleil. So if you don't know, Soleil is our late harvest Sauvignon Blanc wine, and it needs Mother Nature to cooperate. You need, and Tim, I'm gonna have you jump in, but what you need damp temperatures and a little bit of heat to produce the noble rot, the mold, which will concentrate the grapes, correct?
Yeah, you've got to get it's really it's kind of surprisingly tricky to get it when you want it. But yeah, you need that right combination of humidity, some moisture in the air, and heat and mold spores. So you might be happy to hear this, Lee and Eugenia, that when we replant part of our DCV3 vineyard next year, we are going to be including in a portion of the vineyard some special misters that will sort of add the humidity in the fruit zone and hopefully encourage some botrytis, so we can, I hope, have a more regular supply of Soleil dessert wine. But I was just going to add, when you ask what to pair with pumpkin pie, I would say Good vanilla ice cream and whipped cream.
Yes. Yes, don't think too hard on that one. You know, if you try to pair it with the Zin, I really don't think it's gonna work. The Chenin Blanc will probably help it for sure, because the acidity is gonna kind of cut through that richness of the pumpkin pie. So that's gonna be your best bet if that's on your table. But if some of you don't know, so Lee and Eugenia mentioned the Soleil. If you've had it, it is a treat. But it's a wine we've been making for a while, but we only make it when the when the climate prohibits it, and it's kind of a late harvest Sauvignon Blanc. That what's incredible about that wine is it has a lot of acidity to it, so it's a sweet wine, but it's not overly syrupy, and it's reminiscent of a wine that you get in what you would get in Sauternes, which is in Bordeaux, which pairs really well with a lot of different things. But yes, I want to see it again. Tim wants to see it again. We're going to do it again. But pumpkin pie, whipped cream, vanilla ice cream, you won't have a better pairing.
And I have to jump in and say that if you purchased our virtual tasting collection that we were selling to go with this tasting, we included some of our kind of family favorite recipes. And so if you have that pumpkin chiffon pie, that is actually my grandmother's recipe. So if you get to try it, let me know what you think, and know that you are definitely having one of our family traditions. Chris and Jean were mentioning, if Lee and Eugenia brought up the Soleil, Chris and Jean brought up our grappa, saying that they still have some of our grappa. So what would you suggest to go with that, Tim and Darren?
I would say a nightcap. Probably.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, did you, Darren or Tim, have anything else to add in this case? Before we
I would just wish everyone a safe and enjoyable Thanksgiving. Don't get too crazy out there, okay? We want to see you back here again. So
What do I do?
it's really great to see all of you.
What about you, Darren?
The same sentiment. It's really good to see people. We've been open, close, and we're people ask how we're doing, and we're doing okay. We're doing what we can, and I'm happy the holidays are here to spend with our close ones, and we'll get through this tough year, and hopefully 2021 brings better vibes, and I hope to see everyone out again. In the meantime, let's do this again. We're gonna continue doing these, and it's fun, so why not?
And that's quite the perfect lead in, though. I know Chris and Jean, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I just have a question. DCV3 I'm passionate about DCV3, and you're replanting the vineyard.
Yeah, actually, that's been sort of an ongoing process. So you may or
I
may
know the vines are really, really old.
Yeah, and when I arrived here, I'm not even sure that what the vines there were. There might have been a small block that was some of the original vines, but I don't think any of the original vines had survived. It's really tough in the location where that vineyard is next to Dry Creek to keep vines for many, many years, because any river or body of water is a host to the insects that transmit Pierce's disease. And
Yeah.
so the vines die out. And so shortly before I arrived here in 2011, I think it was 2010, the winery had replanted sort of one half of the vineyard, and we've got some wonderful new clones there. But I've also been sort of adamant about preserving clone 1 of Sauvignon Blanc, which is kind of the work, the best known and most widely planted clone of Sauvignon Blanc, because I figure that's got to be what was in the original vineyard. And we are going to, and so we have a little bit of that now. We're going to add to that in the new planting. And we are going to plant some Semillon and another new selection from the Loire Valley Sauvignon Blanc that I've worked with and really love. So we're just going to keep the evolution of the vineyard going, and like we talked about, hopefully get some Soleil out of a part of the vineyard as well.
I really hope you keep the same flavor profile.
We know you'll do what's best.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and one of the things that we are doing with the DCV3 for that single vineyard bottling is we definitely pick at a lower ripeness. So that's usually around 21.5 bricks. And I got that partly by talking to David Stair, our founder, and just, in his early days when he was making Sauvignon Blanc, they usually picked at a little lower ripeness than we typically do now, and tastes change in the wine world. But I really wanted to respect that original vision. And so you really get a lot more of those herbaceous flavors and higher acidity. And we were just tasting the 2020 DCV3 Sauvignon Blanc the other day in the lab. And it's got some good acid there, and it's definitely got some really grassy flavors in it. So I hope you will really enjoy that.
We have faith in you.
Actually, I wanted to let everyone know one of the next tastings, if you can do it, we have our virtual tasting.
You're stealing my line, Darren.
Well, you want to do it?
Yes, I'm going to go a little bit here.
Right, but I've been so excited about it. That's why I wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
I know. Well, that's why I want to make sure I can say it all here, is that we have our next virtual tasting. I put it in the chat for you guys. Our next virtual tasting where everyone is invited is our January 28th tasting that we're going to be doing with our winery president, Kim Stair-Wallace, and her father, Dave Stair, is going to be joining us. And they're going to be talking about the first harvest. And that's going to be the theme of this 1972 tasting. We're going to focus on our Chenin, our Fumé, and our Sauvignon Blanc, our Chardonnay. And Dave and Kim have a lot of good stories to tell from that first harvest. So I hope you all will join us. And if you are a club member, and even if you're not, you should join our club just for our virtual holiday extravaganza. It is going to be amazing. We're going to be doing small breakout rooms. Tim's going to be hosting one with a 2000 Cabernet Sauvignon. That's part of the ticket to this. Darren's going to be doing a cooking demonstration with Ian, providing color commentary if you're familiar with Ian. Our assistant winemaker Brian's going to be talking about our current vintage of Cabernet. Kim and Dawn are going to be sharing their new olive oil and honey. If you have not been able to taste our olive oil and honey yet, because we just released it. And then our very own Ashley Babin, who makes everything beautiful, is going to be giving little tips and tricks about how to make your holiday table look amazing with just things around your house and easy tricks. So we're really excited to have some really small group kind of one-on-one time with you guys. So we hope you will join us. I know a couple of you have already signed up, and we're excited to have you there. But yes, the extravaganza is virtual. Yep, it's a Zoom call with breakout rooms. So we're gonna have no more than 10 people in a breakout room. So you're off of mute, you get to chat freely and really get to talk and not just stare at our talking heads. So with that, please let us know if you have any other follow-up questions. It's so good to see you all. Please stay safe. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And thank you so much for supporting us and being a part of our wine club family. If you want to register for any of our virtual tastings, they're right on our website waiting for you. And we can't wait to see you again. Oh, and Darren, actually, we can plug Darren here. Darren is doing private virtual tasting. So if you have friends and family around the country that you want to just have a private virtual tasting, definitely reach out to Darren. He's your guy, and he will make a really fun family or friend or company gathering for you and the people that you want to connect with.
Yeah, me and Ian, it's usually myself, but Ian does them too. And we can customize too. We have the virtual tastings online, and there's different packages, but if there's something you want to kind of eliminate or add, if you want to add a couple wines, we can totally do that. Shipping is free for most states, which is fantastic, and you get your discount. Getting pretty busy with the virtual tastings in the next few weeks, but late December and January are fantastic. So let us know, especially if you have family over. That's the best time.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. It was so great to see you. Thank you for sharing your time with us. It was really, I just can't get over how great it is to see all your faces. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
lot of fun. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I know you can unmute and say hi to us if you want.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thanks, everybody.
Guys,
Great fun.
this has been terrific.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much.
Where's everybody come from? Does anybody come from any further than St. Louis?
New York.
Chicago.
San Diego.
Chicago.
Where?
Chicago.
We had a Florida. in.
North
I'm in
Carolina.
here.
Minnesota, Georgia. New York.
Alaska.
Ooh.
Next time I'm gonna make everyone change
Hi,
their
Darren.
so they say where
Hi,
they're
Linda.
from.
How did the pairing go?
This is Linda Finkus. We just had a big turkey dinner.
I know. How did it go?
Great.
Good.
See you in a couple of years.
Couple years,
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
couple months.
Bye.